Hey folks, back with 2 episodes of Steven Universe because the numbering's getting complicated, but I'm continuing in what I believe is the airing order, and these are the 2 episodes which aired after Uncle Grandpa, so I guess the 5th and 6th episodes of the season. Anyway, it's Story for Steven and Shirt Club are the 2 episodes. So first off, Story for Steven, really good episode, really solid stuff. I enjoyed it a lot. I'm not sure that there's a ton to say about it really, because it was just a really sweet episode about how Steven's parents met. It's interesting that Greg left out Marty in the past, but now includes him. Because Marty's particular brand of dickishness, I can see as being something Greg just wanted Steven not to know existed for as long as possible, you know? Marty is someone who is instrumental in his attitude toward other people. That's really consistent throughout the episode. He uses people. He, for example, there's a great line in there, a great exchange between him and Greg, where he says to Greg something like, your problem is that you want one large woman when you could have multiple smaller ones. And Greg responds in fairly obvious, shock and dismay, women are people, Marty. Which is a great response. Greg Universe is a feminist, surprising no one. But he, Marty's attitude there was seeing, women as numbers on a scorecard, seeing them as not people, but, objects to be used, and discarded. So having, consumable resource, so having a lot of them is better than having one, which is not how people work. But it's also reflected in the way he treats Greg, where he's using Greg for money. He's trying to get rich off of Greg's musical talent. Which is interesting. The episode seems to be implying that Greg gave up on his, dreams of being a musician to be with Rose. And that he did so completely happily and willingly. But that's why he lives in Beach City and, runs a car wash. Because he didn't go to the big city to pursue his music. He didn't continue on with the tour. Now, of course, he probably wouldn't have achieved the riches that Marty was talking about. For starters, because Marty had a 75% take, so Greg clearly isn't much of a businessman. But also, just, that's usually how it goes. There's, music is, like many other things, a glamour industry. It seems like a good way to get rich because success and fame go hand in hand in that industry. But that's because the musicians we've heard of are the ones who are incredibly successful. For every musician you've heard of, there's dozens you haven't who never get beyond the, small town show that only a couple people show up to. And that's, realistically speaking, that's what Greg gives up on, but it's still interesting that he's willing to do that, because how many times have we seen, a female character give up her dreams of her personal career in order to, pursue love? It's kind of refreshing to see a male character do it for once. Because it's, first of all, because it's an exception, it doesn't have any kind of prescriptive force to it. It's a choice Greg made rather than something that's being suggested that all men should make. And it's a legitimate choice. Some people, would rather be with the person they love than leave that person to pursue their career goals. Because those are both things that people want. And individual people get to decide for themselves, out of the things they want, if there's a contradiction between those things, which will they go with? The problem is that when it's consistent again and again, one particular group of people is shown giving up their dreams and the other one never is, then that starts to take on a prescriptive force, then that starts to be a problem. The reversal isn't the same because it's, within the larger context of our culture. But yeah, good episode. It was nice seeing a glimpse of Greg as he was back in the day. And it was nice to have Rose Quartz around. Has she had spoken lines before? She must have, because there was that episode with the video. But, I don't know, her voice was surprising to me. Is it the same voice? I don't know. Might be. I don't remember really what her voice sounded like. Anyway, so that was a good episode. Shirt Club, which is the second episode I watched for this vlog, also a good episode. I enjoyed getting to see a little bit more of the relationship between, I am totally blanking on his name, Mayor Dewey's son. Anyway, the relationship between him and his dad. And, the fact that they were close once in the past and no longer really are, don't really get along, but that his dad keeps trying. But, teenagers gotta be teenagers, and they're gonna, very often, reject their parents as a way of pushing themselves out into the world. It's the human equivalent of, baby birds flinging themselves out of the nest. We do it by antagonizing our parents, by and large. At least within this culture. It's one of those things that's culturally determined, but it does seem to be pretty common that some form of rejection of the parent is a part of the growing up process. A rejection or defeat or, breaking away from the parent. That said, I also enjoyed seeing, I think there was a little bit of the creators themselves working through some stuff, because, of course, there's been enormous amounts of Steven Universe fan art, fanfic, gemsonas are everywhere, and we're living in a weird moment for derivative works. As Steven says, he's upset that his art is being used in ways that he doesn't like. And, I had a friend back in the day who was an author and who argued very passionately that while she was okay with people making fan fiction out of her work, she was completely on the side of any author who said no fan fiction allowed, and thought that should be respected. To which I respond, and she argued very passionately that authors have a moral right to control of their creations, which is a historical bullshit. Because historically speaking, stories and art of all kind were shared and exchanged and played with. Stories were told by a storyteller and then passed from storyteller to storyteller, each one doing their own version. You know, and, you know, in the arts, painters would learn by making copies of their teachers' paintings and of other classic, you know, images. They would illustrate scenes from well-known stories. They, you know, so on and so forth. Music is full of variations on a theme by. No permission would be sought for those, because you weren't using the other person's work, you were creating something new built on someone else's work. It's really only with the advent of modern copyrights that starts to change, because one of the major inspirations for modern copyright law was the production of, you know, modern international copyright law arises from a number of cases of people stealing works across national borders, and one in particular that made a lot of headlines was an American writing an unauthorized and getting paid for writing an unauthorized sequel to one of H.G. Wells's novels. And, you know, back in end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th century. You know, and that created this impetus for, you know, taking control of derivative works as well. Because the idea was that he was unfairly riding on Wells's popularity and using Wells's creations without Wells's permission. The problem is that basically it's the interaction of capitalism and creativity. You can't, you know, you have to control your work so that you can eat, because we no longer are willing to pay, you know, we can no longer support the number of storytellers that once existed, because they're now in competition with television and radio and professionally published novels. And the result is that storytelling has gone from a local thing to a glamour industry, just like rock stars with Story for Stephen. A handful of authors make huge amounts of money, and the rest are stuck doing it part-time while doing their day jobs. And until we break that, you know, stranglehold of capitalism, that's the price we have to pay, is creative people have to find a way to live off of their creations. Or find another way to live and make their creations on the side. You know, your options are to have a world in which there's no such thing as a professional artist, or very few professional artists, and almost everyone is an amateur, or one in which there are almost none left at all, because, you know, because it's possible for someone who is talented and popular and lucky to spread their stuff so widely to so many people. You know, it's not inevitable. It's not the only way things have to be, but it is the way things are structured now, and that creates a tension that places artists in competition with one another, because that's, capitalism is all about competition, which results inevitably in them being hostile to one another. And so, yeah, this notion that people are doing stuff with my stuff that I don't like becomes something that you can put teeth behind. And that's a problem, because ultimately, a lot of art is about doing stuff with other people's stuff that they might not like. I mean, I have, you know, do the makers of Sailor Moon and Dragon Ball Z and so forth, all the big 90s anime, are they happy with what Steven Universe does? Would they be happy if they knew about it? Assuming that most of them probably don't. Do we care whether they'd be happy with it? And the answer is probably not. Because once you put your art out into the world, that's it. You've surrendered control of it. because literally every person who reads your book, literally every person who watches your show, literally every person who looks at your art is going to interpret it a little bit differently. They're going to bring their own things to it. They're going to walk away with a different experience. Necessarily, because they're coming at it from a different direction than you did. No two people are ever going to experience work of art in exactly the same way. And the result is that everyone is creating derivative works all of the time. You can't stop them. The only way to stop them would be to not release your art out into the world at all. Keep it all at home, never show it to anyone. And I guess if that's what you want to do, that's what you can do. But, good luck being a successful artist doing that. I feel like I got off on a bit of a tangent on an episode that's really about sons and fathers and forgiveness. It's clear that there's something between Buck? Is his name Buck? Let's go with Buck. Buck and Dewey that, some kind of bad blood between them. And there's no forgiveness to be found there. But in the end, Buck and Steven forgive each other, which is something. And we learn a little something about, sincerity. Because the thing about Buck is that his approach to art is very much showman-like. He wants the attention, he wants to get, he just wants to rile people up and get attention, and he's not really, he sees the sincerity of Steven's drawing of his father as being naive, and he thinks that that's funny, and a lot of other people do too. But there's, something to be said for finding, for Steven's approach to life. Something to be said for, he's kind of naive, but he's good-hearted. He's not, as cold as Buck really seems to be. And Steven's, and then Steven shows Buck how it feels. Steven is the one who conveys an emotion to someone else. Steven is the one who shows Buck how it feels to have people laughing at your work when that's not what you intended for them to do. And that's where you kind of get that funny line, because, you don't have any right to control how people interpret your work, but at the same time, it is quite possible for people to be utter dicks to the creators of works that they either like or that they don't like. People are often entitled asshats. And frankly, entitled asshattery is a rampant problem in fandom in general. People can be very cruel to creators, very demanding, very willing to mock things like amateurish fan fiction written by 11-year-olds, or fan art written by, made by 11-year-olds. It's a harsh and hostile environment out there. And, Beach City really feels like the internet in this episode. It feels like a bunch of people who are just looking at something to attack. Which is sad. It's not the vibe I normally get out of Beach City. It doesn't seem like the kind of place where people are really into, mean-spirited irony. But, well, for this episode at least it was. Alright, I'm going to call that a log. I'm going to go watch some more and record another one. Bye.